Greetings. My name is Dylan, son of Ammon. I've but recently passed my 20th summer, and for the first time in my life, I dwell in a place I may rightfully call my own. Well, more or less. Truth be told, it was my father's gift to me when I came of age. A modest stone cottage at the edge of Greystone Hollow near where the woods curl into the hills. The dwelling, however, was far from sturdy when I first arrived. Roof, half-collapsed ivy strangling the shutters, the hearth cold and black with soot. One of those fixer-uppers, as the old men say by the tavern. I've spent the past 2 years pouring every spare coin and waking hour into restoring it beam by beam, brick by brick. The floor still groans beneath my boots, the walls lean like tired drunks, and the gardens grown wild as a widow's grief. But it stands, and it's mine. And I take pride in that. The cottage sits at the end of a winding lane tucked into a quiet thicket of pines and elder trees. Folk here tend goats, mend fences, and greet each other with nods from beneath wide-brimmed hoods. It's the sort of place where neighbors trade eggs for milk, where gossip rides faster than horse carts. But I hadn't spoken with a single soul, not for lack of will, just work. I was always thatching ceiling leaks or sharpening my tools by moonlight, and truth be told, I'd never had need for a horse or carriage. Still don't. My father's old pushcart carved black oak with iron-bound wheels has served me since I was 16. I know its weight, like I know the rhythm of my own breath. That morning I knelt by its rear axle, tightening a stubborn wooden pin that refused to stay in place. The sun bore down like an overseer, and sweat ran freely down my brow, dripping into the dirt. I never heard her approach. "Looks like you got your hands full," a woman's voice said, cool and lilting. I looked up surprised. She stood a few paces from the gate beside the low stone fence, garbed in a simple blue dress with her sleeves rolled to the elbow. A scarf crowned her dark wavy hair, which spilled freely to her shoulders. No jewelry, no fuss yet. She carried herself like someone who'd once dined among nobles. I couldn't guess her years, but she bore that ageless kind of beauty, quiet, knowing unshaken by the world. She didn't just stand there. She belonged there. I wiped grease and dust onto my trousers and gave a sheepish grin. "Aye, the axle's being contrary today," I said. "Either I fix it or it breaks loose halfway to the market." She laughed a soft, knowing sound. Were I a touch younger, I might have asked for a ride. I froze. Was she jesting? She looked at me, eyes dancing like she enjoyed seeing me puzzled. Then with a smirk half hidden behind her hand, she turned and began walking up the lane again. "Safe travels, neighbor," she called, glancing once over her shoulder. I stayed crouched by the wheel, watching her fade into the tree-lined bend. I wasn't sure if I'd seen her before, perhaps at the village square, too buried in repairs to notice one on me. But there was something about her I couldn't shake. The way she moved effortless. The way her voice lingered like smoke after a hearth fire. That evening, I sat on the old bench I'd carved for the porch, sipping cold cider from a tin cup. The sun slipped behind the rooftops and chimney smoke curled lazy into the sky. A pair of lads rode past on a pony, laughing and tossing stones at a tree. A few villagers gathered by the well, trading fish for bread. Just another quiet dusk. But my eyes kept flicking to the bend in the road. She never came back that day. I leaned into the bench, let out a quiet chuckle, and shook my head. Maybe this place wouldn't be so uneventful after all. "I'm called Rebecca," she said, her voice warm with a glint of mischief behind it, "though most in the village simply call me Becca." I took the parcel from her hands, a small cloth-wrapped bundle that smelled faintly of spice and baked fruit, and smiled. "A pleasure, Becca." "I'm Dylan." I hesitated, then added honestly, "You're right. I've hardly stepped past my own garden gate since moving in." She laughed a soft sound like wind through grain. "Aye, I've noticed. You've been out here with hammer or chisel near every day. I thought you might be part of the cottage by now." That broke the stillness between us. I motioned toward the inside, just past the old oaken threshold. "Would you care to step inside for a cup of brewed bark or steeped sage?" I asked. "The place is humble still, but the walls stand firm and the hearth keeps a good flame now." She gave a gentle laugh. "I'd like that." We sat at my small table in the hearthroom. Nothing matched, the chairs creaked, and the surface bore scars from old meals and rough repairs. I poured her a steaming drink, and we unwrapped the parcel she'd brought, a half-dozen honey cakes, golden and sticky-dusted with cinnamon. Talking with her felt oddly natural, like picking up a conversation halfway through. She told me she lived 4 homes down past the crooked elm in the cottage with the hanging herb baskets. Been there near 15 years, she said, cupping the wooden mug with both hands. Raised my children there, just the 3 of us. Their father left before they'd outgrown their boots. Her voice didn't crack. It carried no bitterness, just a quiet, grounded sort of strength. We were wed too young. When hardship came, he turned his back and vanished like morning mist. I nodded slowly. That can't have been easy. It wasn't, she admitted, taking a sip. But it made me sharper, taught me how to stand my ground and run a home alone. And somehow I did. I shared a bit in return how I'd worked for the Cooper since I was 16, taking odd jobs, trading sweat for silver. How I'd tried studying under a scribe in the next town, but the fees became too steep. And how I'd thrown every coin into this little house, restoring it nail by nail, season by season. It's far from perfect, I said, glancing around in the dim hearthroom with its patched roof and mismatched furniture. But I've grown to like the struggle. Makes every nail feel earned. She looked at me, then really looked, and her smile was soft and full of quiet pride. You ought to be proud. Few lads your age would have the grit to tame a place like this. I gave a sheepish shrug, unsure how to take praise from someone like her. Still, it meant something. What struck me most was how easy it was, how our talk flowed like the creek near the eastern bridge, smooth and unhurried. The years between us didn't seem to matter. For nearly an hour we spoke about the village-old tale's stubborn goats and the way bread always burned on one side of the hearth. Eventually she glanced toward the window where the light was beginning to lean gold. She rose slowly, brushing her hands on her skirt. I should take my leave before I wear out your welcome. She smiled gently. It was a joy to meet you, Dylan. The pleasure's mine, I said sincerely, standing with her. And thank you truly for the honey cakes. She stepped toward the door but paused just before crossing the threshold. Her lips curled again into that small, knowing grin. By the way, she said without looking back, I meant what I said the other day. I raised a brow. About the ride, she chuckled, that same quiet, teasing tone that always threw me off balance, about wishing I were a few years younger. Once again I froze, unsure how to breathe. She gave her head a playful shake, smiled softly, and stepped outside into the evening light. I closed the door behind her, then leaned my forehead against the cool wood and chuckled under my breath. Something in me knew this wouldn't be the last time I saw her. The next few days passed in their usual hush, but I couldn't shake this strange, low hum in my chest, restless, unsettled. I kept myself busy. There was always something to mend. The latch on the larder door had started sticking. One of the rain gutters hung crooked from the last storm. A loose plank on the porch stairs squeaked whenever I stepped wrong. I made lists, checked them off. Hammered, sanded, climbed, scraped. But each time I wandered out into the yard, I found myself gazing down the road toward her cottage as if expecting to glimpse her again. I didn't know what exactly I was hoping for. A glance, a smile, a reason. Then came Wednesday, warm and wind-kissed, the sort of day that lured even the laziest hens out of the coop. I'd been outside since morning, battling a warped board on the front steps. Sweat trickled down my back as I crouched with hammer in hand and nails scattered around me. That's when I heard the sound of footsteps, soft but sure, crunching gently on the gravel path. I paused mid-swing and looked up. And there she was, Rebecca. She wore soft brown riding trousers and a cream-colored tunic with the sleeves pushed up to her elbows. A simple silver brooch fastened the collar. Her hair was half-tied with a leather cord, loose tendrils brushing her cheeks as she approached. Well met again. Craftsman, she called with a grin, tucking a lock of hair behind her ear. Still locked in battle with this old house, I stood and wiped my palms on my breeches. At this point, I ought to charge the whole street for repairs. I've half a mind to hang a sign out front, Dylan the Patchmaster. She laughed, stepping closer. You jest, but truly the place looks finer each time I pass. You've breathed life into it? I gestured toward the step I'd been fixing. Still uneven. There's still a long road ahead. But then I suppose I'm a bit like the house myself. I offered a small smile. A work in progress. She tilted her head slightly, her gaze catching mine and holding it a moment longer than one might expect. "Aren't we all?" she murmured, her voice low and warm. There was a pause, then not awkward, not strained, just full. Like the air between us had thickened with unspoken words, neither of us yet brave enough to say them. She exhaled, glancing down for a heartbeat. "I hate to trouble you," she began, chewing slightly at the corner of her lip. "But there's a leaky basin in my scullery that's been driving me half mad." I tried tightening the clasp beneath it, but no luck. I smiled at once, already moving toward my tools. "I can take a look if you'd like." Her whole face lit up, not dramatically, but with this soft, almost embarrassed relief. "You'd truly do that?" "Of course," I said. "Lead on." I packed my tools into their cloth wrap, brushed the dust from my tunic, and followed her down the lane. The cottage she'd spoken of, with the old oak tree rising like a guardian beside it, looked exactly as she'd described, quiet, worn at the edges, but full of heart. The shutters had faded with the years. The porch showed signs of weather and worry. But wildflowers clustered beside the walkway and hand-carved wind chimes clinked softly in the breeze. It was the kind of place built not for show, but for living, for love, for loss. Inside the scullery was small, but bright sunlight streamed through a round window above a deep stone basin. The walls were lined with hanging herbs, wooden spoons, and copper pans worn thin by time. On the mantel there were hand-drawn sketches, pressed flowers, a child's wooden whistle. This was not just a home. This was a story told in quiet things. I knelt by the basin tools and hand fingers working the stubborn brass pipe with effort and patience. She leaned casually against the counter, arms crossed, eyes fixed gently on me. After a moment, she spoke. "You know," she said softly, "I admire how hard you work. Most men your age wouldn't even know what to do with a pipe clamp." I chuckled, not looking up. "When you've little coin and everything you own keeps falling apart, you learn fast or you drown." She laughed, a rich, genuine sound that filled the little room like sunlight. "You're different," she said then, voice softer. I glanced up. She wasn't smiling now. Not exactly. Her face was calm. "Studying." I stood wiping my hands on the cloth she passed me. "There. Shouldn't give you trouble anymore," I said. She turned the spigot. The dripping had stopped. She looked back at me, and I realized she was standing a touch closer than before. Not pressing, not crowding. Just close enough for me to catch the soft scent of lavender and warm spice lingering near her collar. The moment sat between us, not awkward, but thick with quiet energy. "You didn't have to do that," she said gently. "But thank you." It was nothing, I replied just as quietly. She hesitated just a heartbeat, and then reached out and let her hand rest lightly on my forearm. It wasn't bold. It wasn't long. Just a touch. But it felt like fire in my skin. "I owe you," she said, drawing her hand back. "Let me offer you supper." "My treat." I blinked. "That's not necessary." She tilted her head, that familiar glint in her eye returning. "It's just supper, Dylan." Before I could think it through, my mouth had already answered, "All right, sure." That Friday eve we met at a small tavern near the edge of the wood, the sort of place lit by low lanterns and thick with laughter. A bard played quietly in the corner. The tables were covered in checkered cloth. Iron hooks lined the walls with old riding gear and faded portraits of forgotten lords. The fare was simple but warm roasted fowl, stewed root vegetables, bread torn straight from the oven, and mulled wine served in earthen mugs. At first our talk was light stories of crooked nails and busted floorboards, favorite meals, poorly cooked stews, and once-toppled bookcases. We laughed, easily. But as the evening wore on, the conversation deepened. She told me of raising her children alone, of long nights, hunched over ledgers, mornings spent braiding hair and tying shoes. "There's something strange about a home after they're gone," she said, her voice distant, swirling the wine in her cup. "You spend years preparing them to leave, and when they do, you find you were never ready." I listened not out of duty, but because I couldn't look away. I shared my own truth too, the way school slipped through my fingers when I couldn't afford another season, how I juggled labor by day and repairs by lantern light, hoping I could carve something steady from a world that never promised it. "You've done well," she said gently, eyes fixed on mine. "You should be proud." We stayed long after the mugs had emptied and the candles burned low. When we stepped back into the night, the air had cooled, and the moon cast long shadows across the path. We walked slowly side by side through the quiet of our village. At the corner where her cottage peeked through the trees, she stopped. "Thank you, Dylan," she whispered. "Tonight was lovely." "It was," I said honestly. She reached out, brushed her fingertips against my sleeve. "Good night," she said, voice like velvet. "Good night, Bika." She slipped into the shadow of her home, and I remained there still. The night was hushed, only the chirp of crickets stirred the air. I stood for a long while, heart thudding, unsure what had changed, only that something had. When I finally walked home under a sky full of stars, I couldn't stop thinking of her. Her voice, her smile, the warmth of her hand on my arm. The next morn felt different. I lay there staring at the low-beam ceiling of my cottage, the distant clink of a rooster's call echoing across the trees, and all I could think was Rebecca. Becca, the way she smiled, the quiet grace in her laughter, the gentle press of her fingers, the warmth in her voice when she told me good night. It lingered. I sat up in my straw-filled cot the next morning, rubbing my face, trying to shake the weight in my chest. But it clung to me like the morning fog. I wasn't some love-struck boy. I'd seen enough of life's edges, and yet I'd never felt anything quite like this. I knew the age between us stretched wider than most would accept, but I couldn't bring myself to care. I liked her. Simple as that. In the days that followed, I began to see more of Rebecca. Small moments at first. She'd wave at me from across the lane while trimming her hedgerow. Once she caught me struggling with a heavy satchel of market goods and crossed the road without hesitation to lend a hand. One morning she appeared at my doorstep with a cloth-wrapped basket still warm from the oven, honey oat muffins sweet with currant and clove. No reason, just because. And then another day, she knocked again, that mischievous smile already on her lips. "I swear I'll never win a battle with this cursed jar," she said, lifting a stubborn vessel of pickled tomatoes. "Think you could save supper?" Of course I said yes. I followed her back to her home, wrapped my hands around the glass, gave it a twist, and the lid popped off as if it had been waiting. We both laughed, leaning into it like we'd forgotten the rest of the world for a moment. I lingered longer than I needed. She didn't ask me to stay, not in words, but she didn't need to. As the days melted into dusky evenings, something grew between us. I found myself inventing reasons to pass by her home, a tool to borrow an herb. I was out of a question about the coming storm. She seemed to find just as many excuses to wave me inside. And before long, we were spending entire evenings together. We'd cook over her hearth, then eat outside on the small wooden bench in her garden, the vines overhead strung with soft lanterns that swayed gently in the breeze. Sometimes she'd laugh and lay her hand gently on my knee. Other times, I'd reach out and tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, and she'd meet my gaze, steady, unflinching knowing. One night, I invited her to my cottage. I made spiced noodles with stewed tomato and basil, my best effort at a meal worthy of her praise. We ate on the small stone terrace outside beneath the full moon's glow. As the fire burned low and our words slowed, the quiet between us deepened. She turned to me, her voice barely more than a breath. "You make me feel alive again, Dylan. I don't even know how to explain it." I swallowed hard, heart loud in my chest. I'd been with others before, sure, but this wasn't that. This was deeper, gentler, real. When she leaned in and kissed me, it wasn't hurried. It was slow, soft. Her lips warm, her fingers rising gently to the sides of my face like she wasn't sure I was real, and I did the same. When we pulled away, we both knew what we were stepping into. The risk, the difference in years, the judgment if anyone were to know. But none of that mattered in the quiet glow of that night. From then on, our nights changed. I'd ride out after sunset on a small chestnut gelding I'd borrowed from the smithy, and she'd leave a lantern glowing on her porch rail so I'd know she was waiting. Some nights we curled up on her wool-stuffed settee, a book open on her lap, her head on my shoulder, my arm curled protectively around her. Other nights, we'd light a single candle, let soft lute music play, and dance barefoot across her wooden floor, the hem of her gown brushing my ankles as we swayed. And sometimes the night carried us further, not hurried, not reckless, just two souls seeking warmth, finding solace in one another's arms. I won't recount those moments in detail, only that they were mutual, tender, and real. There was no shame, just the simple, quiet grace of being seen. One night, her head resting on my chest, she opened in a way I'd never heard before. When I was younger, she murmured, I thought I had it all figured out. A husband, children, a house with a porch swing. That was the dream. Her fingers traced small circles on my forearm, slowly. But life, she sighed. Life had other plans. He left before I even knew what love truly was. And I spent the next 20 years surviving, raising my boys, working long hours, always giving, always sacrificing, until I forgot who I was when no one else needed me. I held her tighter. Then let me give you that I whispered, even if only for a little while. And I meant it. Soon we began venturing beyond the hollow. We kept our distance from familiar faces, choosing instead to slip away to the city, a full day's ride on horseback where taverns buzzed with music fires, crackled beneath open tents, and no one looked at us twice. I showed her my favorite places, a poet's corner where verses spilled like wine, a riverside inn where fiddlers played long past midnight, even a hidden glade where fireflies lit the grass like stars. At first she was wary, the crowds, the noise, the flicker of so many youthful voices. But slowly she loosened, laughed more, let her hands wander as she danced, her eyes closed, her face glowing. One night, beneath a canopy of firelight and banners, she twirled in my arms, breathless, her hair haloed by torchlight. This is madness, she laughed, gasping through joy. I haven't done this in 20 years. I pulled her close hand, pressed against her lower back. Then tonight is yours and no one else's. We stayed out until dawn, wandering the cobbled streets hand in hand, exchanging secrets, hopes, regrets, whispered like confessions. When we reached the stables, just before mounting our horses, she wrapped her arms tight around me and rested her head against my chest. I feel alive again, she whispered. So did I. As I rode home, with the wind cool against my face, I knew, whatever this was, it was rare, and it was real. And somehow, against every odd, it had found us here. Not with anyone, and certainly not like this. But every time I rode that path up the hill and saw her waiting near the door, her soft smile bathed in firelight, I knew there was no place else I'd rather be. Weeks bled into months. And our secret, it became a kind of comfort. We never gave it a name. It wasn't courtship, it wasn't some reckless dalliance, nor was it mere friendship. It was something entirely our own. A quiet world we'd built, one only the two of us could walk inside. Most evenings I found myself at her hearth after sundown. Some nights we cooked together side by side, arguing over whether flatbread should be soft or crisp at the edges, flicking flour at each other like children. Other evenings we simply sat on the porch, swing beneath her overhanging vines, sharing mugs of spiced wine as the sky passed from gold to indigo. The silence between us never felt heavy. Just being near her, it stilled something inside me. Every so often Rebecca would glance toward the road, her brow knitting with unease whenever footsteps passed too close. "Do you think anyone suspects?" she asked one night, her voice a hush. Perhaps I said honestly. "But does it matter?" She leaned against me and let out a quiet breath. "No. I stopped caring what people thought long ago. In the village, we were careful. No stolen touches, no telling glances, just neighbors exchanging polite words by the well. But behind her door, in the light of the hearth, we were something different, something real. We never made promises about the future. never dared ask, what are we? That was the beauty of it. It wasn't built for forever. It was built for now. One night, as we lay curled together beneath a woolen blanket on her settee, the flames dancing across the stone walls, she turned to me. I just want you to know. She whispered, her voice barely more than the crackle of the fire, this is the happiest I've been in years. I reached for her hand and gave it a gentle squeeze. Me too. Even in the dark, I could feel her eyes on mine. I know this can't last, Dylan. Her words came carefully tender and true. You'll meet someone nearer your age. You'll wed, raise children, build the kind of life people write stories about. I didn't answer at first. Her words hit something deep in me. She turned slightly, her voice even softer. Just promise me something. I looked at her. Promise me you'll remember me, not as the older woman down the road, but as the one who made you smile while you were still learning who you are. I reached up, tracing a finger gently along her cheek. I promise. We didn't speak much more that night. We just held each other in the quiet, both knowing that this chapter, beautiful as it had been, was beginning to fold closed. When autumn came, the air shifted. Our time together thinned like morning mist. Rebecca spent more days traveling, visiting her grown sons, helping at the town infirmary. I'd landed work with a local Masons Guild, and my daylight hours were swallowed by stone and sweat. By evening, I was often too tired to lift my head, let alone ride out. We both felt the distance creeping in, but neither of us fought it. That had always been our understanding. It was never about holding on too tight. It was about being fully present while the moment was still ours. The last time I saw her as more than a neighbor was plain and quietly perfect. I came by to return a small book of poetry she'd lent me weeks before. She welcomed me in, and we sat out on her porch swing one final time. No fanfare, no farewell speech. Just two people who had once built a hidden world together. You gave me something I thought I'd lost, she said softly, eyes watching the trees sway in the wind. You gave me my youth again. I smiled. And you gave me something too, Rebecca. You showed me what it means to care for someone fully, freely, without demand. We embraced then, long unhurried, as though the air might never be that still again. When at last we parted, she leaned in and kissed me softly on the cheek. Goodbye, Dylan. Goodbye, Becca. I walked home beneath a sky crisp and clear, the scent of wood smoke in the breeze and the crunch of leaves underfoot. When I reached my gate, I turned one last time toward her cottage. The lantern beside her door still glowed warm and steady, just like it always had. I smiled. That part of my life was finished, and I was at peace with that. We remained neighbors, friendly, familiar, short conversations at the market, courteous nods from across the road. Time moved on as it always does for both of us. But that hidden place we had built, that secret little kingdom made of laughter and low light of whispered words and impossible tenderness, that was ours, and no one else ever knew. Even now, many years later, when I pass that lane on horseback, I find myself smiling without thinking, because I remember, and I kept my promise.